everyone. It's 4 o'clock in New York. Special counsel Robert Mueller speaks for the very first time since his appointment 2 years ago. And his message could not have been clearer. Mueller underscoring the conclusions of his report, and by doing so, revealing just how far from the letter and spirit of the actual text of the Mueller report Attorney General Barr strayed when he sought to spin Mueller's findings in 3 public appearances and 2 letters to Congress before we ever saw a complete sentence from Robert Mueller himself. The 3 big takeaways from Mueller today: 1, if his 22-month-long investigation had found that the president had not committed crimes, Mueller would have said so. 2, from the outset, Mueller was restrained from recommending criminal charges for Trump by a DOJ policy that holds that you cannot indict a sitting president. And 3, the special counsel clearly intended for Congress, not Attorney General William Barr, to make the decision on what to do with the findings of his probe, particularly around the incidents of obstruction detailed in the 2nd volume. Now, here is some of that extraordinary statement from Robert Mueller today.
If we had had confidence that the president clearly did not commit a crime, we would have said so. We did not, however, make a determination as to whether the president did commit a crime. The introduction to the Volume 2 of our report explains that decision. It explains that under long-standing department policy, a president cannot be charged with a federal crime while he is in office. That is unconstitutional. The opinion says that the Constitution requires a process other than the criminal justice system to formally accuse a sitting president of wrongdoing. And beyond department policy, we were guided by principles of fairness. It would be unfair to potentially accuse somebody of a crime when there can be no court resolution of the actual charge. So that was Justice Department policy. Those were the principles under which we operated, and from them we concluded that we would not reach a determination one way or the other about whether the president committed a crime.
Laid bare in those comments, the elaborate spin and deception from Attorney General Barr, who told a very different story about Mueller's conclusions. Here's one example of Barr's spin next to Mueller's in his own words today.
He was not saying that but for the OLC opinion, he would have found a crime. He made it clear that he had not made the determination that there was a crime.
That was Justice Department policy. Those were the principles under which we operated. And from them, we concluded that we would not reach a determination one way or the other about whether the president committed a crime.
And that is where we start today. Couldn't make that up if you wanted to, with some of our favorite reporters and friends. Joining us from the New York Times, Washington correspondent Mike Schmidt, former Assistant Director for Counterintelligence at the FBI, Frank Figliuzzi, and former U.S. Attorney Joyce Vance. With us on set, NBC and MSNBC National Affairs analyst John Heilman's back, and Associated Press White House reporter Jonathan Lemire is here. Joyce Vance, let me start with you. Something that I heard from the time that it was learned that Robert Mueller was done to the moment that his actual report was made available on the DOJ website was the explanation on obstruction is really confusing from DOJ officials. I don't even understand it. Doesn't make any sense. He basically punted. Robert Mueller did nothing of the sort. He did not punt. He found that he could not say at the end of 22 months that Trump had not committed crimes, but he was hemmed in, restrained, boxed in, whatever word you want to use, by DOJ policy, which said that you couldn't indict a sitting president. That's pretty clear.
It's pretty thinly sliced and nuanced here. Mueller starts by saying, or at least from my point of view, analytically, the first step is, if I could have told you the president didn't commit a crime, I would. And I'm not telling you that. So that's the starting point. And then he says, DOJ policy, which is the law, and that's where prosecutors like to start, by understanding the law that they're looking at, says that we really can't make a decision one way or the other here about whether the president committed a crime. We can investigate him, we can investigate others, but what you won't hear from us in this report is that he did commit a crime. Of course, we know the distance between those two. We can't tell you he's cleared, but we can't tell you that he would be charged. When you read all of the evidence in the report, adds up to the conclusion that Mueller would have charged Trump if he hadn't been the president.
Frank Figliuzzi, I've been dying to talk to you all day long. I guess we're left with a whole bunch of questions about why Barr did what he did. Why appear 7 times in writing and in person when Robert Mueller's report, it was always DOJ's plan to release a redacted version at least as soon as they could. Why? What do you think Barr's motive was in pre-spinning so much of this report?
Boy, this goes back to why Barr felt he needed to audition and wanted to audition for the job of Attorney General by writing an unsolicited memo, clearly in favor of the president. And we could talk for hours about the philosophy of an imperial presidency, a powerful executive, and whether Barr sees this as his time in history to promote that concept. But here's the reality. We can't discuss the going forward with the removal of a president without also wondering whether we should be removing this attorney general. He has been disingenuous to the American public. And I'm being polite when I say disingenuous. He's lied to us, and I don't understand why, but I know he has. Today, Mueller said, look, when the Attorney General's been saying that I've been operating under a principle where I could have charged and I didn't, he's been wrong. Where the Attorney General's been saying I found no collusion, he's been wrong. I did focus only on criminal conspiracy. And when it comes to obstruction, and the Attorney General saying that it was his job to make a prosecutive call of no obstruction, he's wrong. I actually said this should go to Congress. So we've got a disingenuous Attorney General. He's not been an honest broker to the American people, and I don't know how he ever again stands up at a podium before the American people and says anything with credibility.
Mike Schmidt, you've covered every twist and turn of the obstruction of justice investigation. Robert Mueller, unlike Attorney General Barr, started with his conclusions on obstruction. What stood out to you today?
Well, the thing about Mueller's statement is that it's really not that different from the report if you closely read it and study it. But the interesting thing here is we saw the power of it being done by him live on television. And you can see where the Democrats, it sort of galvanized at least some of the candidates running for president now saying that they want to move forward with impeachment proceedings. You can see the Democrats on the Hill saying, wow, well, there was an 8-minute statement by Mueller today. Look at how far it sort of moved the ball. Imagine what we could do if we got him for an hour or so. Now, the funny thing about it all is that Mueller, at the end of his statement today, says, there's really no reason to call me because I'm just going to say what's in the report. But it was the power of him saying that what was in the report that appeared to move the ball.
You got everyone around the table nodding. Who wants to go first? Halman? John?
I'll say that, I mean, this is something that we've been reporting for weeks, that the president was terrified of Bob Mueller testifying, that he knew of the power of those images. Certainly the president knows the idea of visual media. He is someone who knows that Robert Mueller hadn't spoken publicly on camera in 2 years, and that America would want to tune in to watch and to hear him speak, and that those words would carry a lot of weight. We're seeing that today even in these brief remarks. An hour-long or so testimony, as Michael said, would carry that much more. And we could certainly say the president today, he watched from the residence of the White House, and his response was for him relatively muted, suggesting that, well, there was no evidence of a crime, so therefore let's all move on. Now, mind you, saying that there's no evidence is a complete shift in tone from what the president has been saying about Mueller, which was total exoneration.
Explain, because the White House message did change today. Go through that.
I mean, first of all, we've known for weeks now, more than nearly 2 months since the summary came out, that the president has been claiming total exoneration. That there was no obstruction, there was no collusion, nothing to see here, folks. Let's move on.
Today, it's like he took a black Sharpie to his collusion.
He was like, well,
and he was like, no evidence of obstruction, no evidence of collusion.
Just like handwritten notes on the tweet. Exactly right.
Yeah.
And we saw that very similar message come from White House Press Secretary Sarah Sanders, the RNC, the vice president, the Trump campaign, all within about an hour or so, all sort of hit the same notes, that there was no evidence of a crime, and it's the American people.
Which still isn't what Mueller said.
It's not. It is a different message. It's still an inaccurate message.
Correct.
And they're trying to suggest, though, that it's time to move on, and they're latched onto this idea, the idea that Mueller's retiring, the idea that he's moving on, he's getting on the rest of his life, so therefore, so should Democrats.
But he's retiring while issuing a referral to Congress to investigate or examine or hold hearings around 10 well-researched incidents of criminal obstruction, it would appear.
I think just to Mike's point and to Lamir's point, I think the reality is that as Mueller ends by saying, I don't want to testify, I'm not going to testify, of course, it's not really up to him. He can be subpoenaed to testify. Right. And I think probably he is going to be invited to testify. I don't think him saying he doesn't want to is going to change the dynamic. And in fact, his appearance, even in saying, I don't want to testify, this brief appearance, in fact, made a powerful case from a Democratic standpoint. I would say from a Democratic small d standpoint about as to why he should testify. He is a careful man, and he takes pains to not appear political, sometimes frustratingly so to those of us who wish he would speak in plain language, because if he spoke in plain language, what he would have said today was, anyone who read my report and said no collusion, no obstruction, total exoneration is a big fat liar. That's what he would have said. In English, no lawyer.
If he had my potty mouth or yours.
The unrestrained, that's not even, that's a potty mouth? Come on, Nicole, if we're going to go potty mouth, we're going to do worse than that. For Mueller. I mean, he just basically said the president and Barr have been lied to you. Let's be really clear about what I said in my report. The main thing, I got to say, there, of all the things he said today, I got focused on, I got really hung up on one word, and the word is the word when, as opposed to the word if. Mueller's very careful in the way he writes things, and when he talks about the obstruction issue, this is what the language was he used. He said, there's a reason why we investigated the efforts to obstruct the investigation. The matters we investigated were of paramount importance. It was critical for us to obtain full and accurate information from every person we questioned. When a subject of an investigation obstructs that investigation or lies to investigators, it strikes at the core of their government's effort to find the truth and hold wrongdoers accountable. He did not say if, which he could have easily written, if a subject obstructs an investigation. Instead, he said when, which to me is either purposely there to suggest this guy obstructed, this president obstructed, or it was a Freudian slip because he believes that he obstructed. He wasn't paying that close attention to the language.
I don't think Freud and Mueller exist.
I don't either. I think it was a very purposeful. I think if what we know about Bob Mueller is how careful he is. I think it was a purposeful choice of word, and I don't think people paid attention to it enough because if he had wanted to write it in the conditional, he could have. I think Bob Mueller thinks that Donald Trump obstructed justice, and he basically is saying, Congress, please, my God, do your work.
Right.
Mike Schmidt, pick up on that, please.
Well, I mean, look, we saw that it moved some of these Democrats running for president who now say they want to move forward with impeachment. But then you also saw Pelosi come out with her statement in which she, kept her position, which is not to do that. And I think we have to see what happens here in the days that follow. Is this sort of just a blip, just something that sort of pops up and, we go back to the regular narrative, or does it actually change things? And, we won't know that and for some weeks.
Frank Figliuzzi, let me hand this off to you as well. I mean, to Heilman's point, Mueller's saying when someone obstructs justice, Donald Trump was the subject or the target, whatever you want to call him, of the obstruction probe. Mueller making abundantly clear that he did attempt to obstruct the investigation. And if you read the near dozen flashpoints that were detailed and investigated, and footnotes include all the witnesses to those 10 incidents, it's abundantly clear that he did commit criminal obstruction. If he was anyone but the president, he would have been charged.
Yeah, look, I know a lot of people are frustrated. I see it in social media. They wish that Mueller would have come out and just said it in plain English. But let me just get you some insight from someone like myself who's sat across the conference table every morning at like 7:30 in the morning, getting the briefing, getting him briefed up for the day, reading his language, his body language. And Heilman's right. What he said today, as measured as it was, what Mueller was telling us was, look, this guy did it. I couldn't possibly even go down the path of drawing up charges because it would be unconstitutional for me to do so. I understand that there's another way to address this man, and it's Congress, and that's the way it should go. That's what he's saying, and I feel the need to kind of interpret Muellerism and Mueller's style, but that's what he's telling us today.
Yeah. Joyce, two former Justice Department officials pointed me back to the actual incidents of obstruction. We've been talking about what Mueller said about obstruction, but it's been a while since we've gone through how Donald Trump sought to obstruct the investigation or the flashpoints that Mueller and his team investigated. We pulled up a few of them. The conduct regarding the Flynn investigation, the firing of Jim Comey, viewed, I guess, in some circles as both an act of obstruction and possibly part of the efforts to work with or support Russia, the efforts to remove Mueller, and then after that, the direction to Don McGahn to lie about and create false records when that story was covered, I think, by the New York Times, efforts to limit the Mueller investigation, and pressure on Sessions to do something Chuck Rosenberg keeps telling me isn't a thing, unrecused from overseeing the Mueller investigation. Can I ask you what those incidents would look like if Congress were to do what it seemed everyone agrees Mueller is asking them to do, which is to open an investigation to basically take the football, which is the text and letter of his report, the tour guide to witness lists and possible interviews and lines of questioning. A lot of those transcripts are in the footnotes of the Mueller report, Volume 2. What would that look like if Congress were to examine just those, 6 incidents in public hearings?
It would look like obstruction of justice committed by the President of the United States. It's just that simple. There's an effort to obstruct. It's related to ongoing proceedings, and it's done with a corrupt intent, the corrupt motive that prosecutors talk about to influence the outcome of those investigations. So it's not exactly rocket science here. And something, Nicole, that we haven't focused on but probably should be thinking about is we're going on the basis of what's available to us in the redacted Mueller report. But Mueller said repeatedly this morning that it's the report itself that contains his testimony, that everything we need to know is in the report. But we still haven't seen that report. Now is the time for Bill Barr to make that report fully available to members of Congress, to make as much of it as possible available to the public. There will be some restrictions for national security and ongoing crimes, but Congress at a minimum should see all of the evidence available to them in pursuing Mueller's charge.
And I believe negotiations are either stalled or being stymied or stonewalled by Attorney General William Barr. Attorney General William Barr had a very, very, very bad day in the press today, getting no love, no safe harbor from folks like Bret Baier over at Fox News or close Trump ally, former federal prosecutor, oftentimes candidate for Attorney General himself, Chris Christie. Here he is.
Yep, it is. And listen, I do think that those comments by Bob Mueller about the other processes, obviously impeachment, being the only constitutional way to accuse the president of wrongdoing, definitely contradicts what the Attorney General said when he summarized Mueller's report and said that he then had to draw the conclusion on that. Mueller clearly contradicts that today in a very concise way.
And here's Fox News, where he doesn't do much better.
This was not, as the president says time and time again, no collusion, no obstruction. It was much more nuanced than that. It was not anywhere as clear-cut as Attorney General Bill Barr. In fact, it was almost exactly the opposite, not clear-cut.
It was a parting shot at his soon-to-be former boss, Bill Barr, who basically whitewashed what Mueller said in the 4-page summary he distributed back in March.
What those guys said.
When you've lost Fox News.
And Chris Christie.
And Chris Christie. Yeah, I mean, this is, look, the Trump base and most Republicans at this point have opted to stay with him. We've heard some reaction from Republicans on the Hill about today. Lindsey Graham, of course, to no one's surprise, is staying with the president on this. But it is a far cry from total exoneration to insufficient evidence. And people around the president are wondering what happens next. Like, how does he react? To this point, as we just discussed, he had one tweet, he's retweeted a few things, but otherwise we haven't heard from him, we haven't seen him. Will that change once he starts watching hours of, safe prediction, I think.
You could feel the ground rumbling
tectonic,
already,
right?
The longer he holds the cable remote control, the more the other one starts to twitch, and it's not long between.
As a Trump ally told me just in the last hour or so, whether it's tonight or in the morning, when the president has time to really soak up the cable news coverage, we'll hear from him again and hear from him very differently than this.
Well, and here's one other thought for you to chew on along with the tape I just showed, Helman. The president loves people who do his bidding, but he likes those people to get good press while doing so. There's nothing he hates more than a man getting slammed in the media.
Yeah, and look, I think that the Barr The president hasn't lost Fox News because tonight, one way or the other, Sean Hannity and the primetime hosts and the others will all be somehow figuring out a way to rally around Trump. But he's lost Napolitano, the smart conservatives. Andrew McCarthy was on today on Fox News. The smarter conservative legal analysts who have sometimes defended him, sometimes been criticized. The person who's lost Fox News is Bill Barr, and that, I think, is for Barr's standing with Trump, despite the fact that Barr has obviously gone to extraordinary lengths, I would say potentially to impeachable lengths, as the Attorney General to defend Donald Trump, to spin this report, to lie about it, to do all the stuff he's done. The reality is, we know with Trump, is that even the most loyal defenders, even those who have thrown their bodies on the train tracks for Trump, as soon as they start to get bad press, and as soon as they start to get bad press, particularly in the media he cares about, they are immediately on shaky ground. And so if I'm Bill Barr, I'm looking at the way Fox News and the conservative legal firmament is turning against him. He's a big target right now, and it may be hard for Nancy Pelosi and others in the Democratic House to want to impeach Donald Trump on the politics of it. Not as hard to try to impeach Bill Barr.
And Barr is actually giving his first network television interview, coincidentally, to CBS later this week. And part of that, he's in Alaska now and is now sitting down. We'll have a chance to spin it his way going tomorrow and Friday.
Frank Figliuzzi, I'm reminded, I'm old enough to remember when House Republicans drew up articles of impeachment for Republican Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein. They were so mad, they were ready to impeach the DAG. It's interesting that after grabbing the ability and the right to declassify intel from the CIA and getting the president to do that for him, after putting his finger on the scale on what is now so blatantly political in the Mueller report, and after sort of re-upping spying, an accusation only heard in primetime on Fox News and from Donald Trump's Twitter feed, that the Democrats still find the Barr calculation murky.
Yeah, it's far less murky for me today. And look, this is the guy that's going to run the investigation of the investigators. And what did we hear Mueller say very, very tangentially today? That his team acted with integrity, that this investigation needed to happen, that it was of great importance, that it went to the core of our democracy. That's a message that if you start messing with why we investigated this and what our results were, you've got a problem on your hands. But yet, Barr's still there. Barr's still going full force. And there's another sentence in Mueller's statement today that we haven't talked about, and that's his reference to the fact that his reference to the fact that his let me recall it here, that Barr is. Well, now I've forgotten my thought, Nicole, but there's a reference in Mueller's statement that hasn't been talked about that goes to the heart of a problem with Barr and between Barr and Mueller. And that's something we need to focus on.
You know what I think it is, Frank? He defends, basically, and this came from two DOJ sources I talked to today, he actually defends the origins of the Russia investigation by pointing out that every American should be concerned about, we've spent the whole first 22 minutes of this show talking about the obstruction volume, but there's also something in here that I know a lot of former law enforcement types have seized on, and that is that Mueller, who, as John and others have said, makes it clear that the origins of the investigation were to probe Russia's attack, which former CIA Director Mike Hayden called a 9/11 style political attack on our democracy. He goes out of his way to defend the origins and the integrity of the Russia probe.
Indeed, and the statement I'm now recalling is it has to do with the team work product, and he says, right, he's resigning today, and the decisions about what of our team work product will be released are being handled outside the team. Well, he's talking about DOJ and Barr. So now Barr's the one calling the shots on what gets released as a result of investigative interviews, reports, surveillances, all out of the work product of the team.
Mike Schmidt, let me give you the last word. In announcing his resignation, he's also announcing the end of the special counsel probe. Are there people moving out of office space? Are there people giving up parking spots? Is that office space going to be rented out to a new Soul Cycle? I mean, what is happening in Washington, D.C., where all that work went down, where all that focus was for 22 months?
Well, many of the lawyers that were working on it have dispersed over the past several weeks, either going back to U.S. attorneys' offices or waiting to go to the private sector. So, some of the more high-profile ones going to work at fancy law firms and such. we knew that in the end it was sort of Mueller and Jim Quarles and Aaron Zebley that were still there, and it looks like he still had a press person working with him. But they were just sort of finishing up. They did the redactions, which was a big process for them. They spent a lot of time on that. They worked with the Justice Department on that. But it does raise the question of what they've been doing over the past 40 days or so. What is it that took so long for him to come out and speak? If indeed he felt that there were these mischaracterizations and that the report was not being taken as he had written it, why is it that we hear from him today and not at the beginning, either when Barr cleared the president or 40 days ago when we got the report?
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.